Hi, welcome back to the shed for episode 6 of Jurgs Cup, and in this episode we're going to be continuing with the neck that we started last time. So in the last episode we got the truss rod routed and we got the routs in for these carbon fibre rods. That's all gone really well. I'm very happy with it. So the next step is to get the carbon rods epoxied in place, and that should be fairly straightforward. I'm going to have to risk being called clinically insane again because I'm going to be using some 5-minute epoxy for that, but it is quite cool in the workshop, so I think that will extend out a little bit longer than that. I had a couple of people comment that possibly these carbon rods aren't going to be strong enough because they flex in that direction. They are very stiff in that direction, so they will add a significant amount of strength into the neck. Now, I spent about half of my adult life working in the composites industry, so I've worked with this stuff a lot. I'm very experienced, and I cast my mind back and remembered some of the calculations that we used to use for the strength, and I've run those again, and just like last time when I ran them on the Rickenbacker build, they show that I'm on the right track here. So there's nothing really for it but to find some scraps of wood so I can get some epoxy mixed up and we'll get them glued in place. Now I'm going to wear gloves for this just to keep the epoxy off my hands, but also to keep any kind of grease from my fingers off these rods while I'm installing them, just to make double sure we get a good stick. I've given them a little bit of a rough up with some kind of like 220 sandpaper, so we should get some good adhesion. And I've just got some acetone on a shop towel. I'll give them a clean off, and you can see there is some stuff's come off them onto the towel. Quite often these will have like a release agent on them as well from when they're manufactured. Obviously they're not going to come out because the fingerboard's on top of them, but you essentially want them to be kind of part of the neck, not just in the neck. If they're stuck nice and firmly into that cavity, they're going to be more effective than if they're loose in there. Okay. And I'm simply going to put some of this onto a bit of wood. Now it's important that you get equal amounts of each component when you're doing these 2-pack epoxy mixes. And just to stop it being messy as well, just pull up on that plunger a little bit and cap it off ready for next time. Just ensure that you're mixing that thoroughly. Just bang that in. Let's give it a good squeeze down. Just to make sure it's all the way in position. Quickly mix a little bit more up. And clean up the excess epoxy. Get the tape off. We'll give that a little bit of time to go off. And with any luck, that will need the absolute minimum of cleanup. It's gone in really well. So I'm going to give that an hour to kind of cure and harden properly. It will go off very quickly, kind of won't be 5 minutes, it never does, but it will go off relatively quickly, but it will take a little bit longer to kind of harden up as we want it to. So I'm going to go and grab a cup of coffee and I'll join you back in a little while. Okay, so that's had about an hour now to cure and we're good to go with it. However, it is a little bit tacky still. And if you ever have that and you don't want it to be an issue, if you simply give it a quick sand, like that, and any dust you create will just adhere to that sticky adhesive and stop it being sticky basically. So that's really good to go now. It is all pretty much below the surface, all level with it. There's a spot there where it's ever so slightly proud. It's probably less than 1/2 mil, I would say. And I think we should be able to block that down very readily and get it nice and flush. So that's a job for later on. There's no need to be doing that now. Next up, we need to get this onto the bandsaw and get the basic shape cut out of it. However, we can't do that because this is actually massive. So what I'm going to do is just get it set up very quickly and then just cut it off so that it's a little bit longer than it needs to be and we can get it onto the bandsaw and get it trimmed up. Okay, so that's trimmed down so I can get it onto the bandsaw, and I've just kind of quadruple checked before I do so. And the last fret falls at 535.5 mil. We've actually got 547 mil to the end of the neck. Now I did mention that I was going to use a Jaguar headstock on this build because I thought it looked more like the Base 6 headstock than the standard Stratocaster headstock that we have there. But that's not really the right way to look at it, is it? Because the Base 6 actually predates the Jaguar by a year. So the Base 6 was introduced in 1961 and the Jaguar in 62, which also means, of course, that the control plate that is on the Base 6 and on the Jaguar, at least for a few years, is identical and therefore a Base 6 item as well. The comparison could be made, as far as the body's concerned anyway, that the Base 6 shares styling characteristics with the Jazzmaster, which was introduced 3 years earlier in 58. But looking at pictures of Jazzmasters, I think they actually have a headstock very reminiscent to a Stratocaster. I don't know, I'm not an expert on this, and I'm just really going on what I can see from pictures. But I just think it's important to acknowledge that chronologically, the Base 6 came before the Jaguar, so these two elements of the styling actually originated on the Base 6 and not on the Jag. I hope that makes sense. But now we've got that useless piece of trivia out of the way, we'll get everything to the bandsaw. And there's the basic shape of the neck cut out. Quite happy with that. It was at this stage in my last base build that the neck turned into a banana, and this is nice and straight still, so happy days. So next up is I am going to set this up, and we're going to mount the headstock template on. Pattern route around the headstock, get that exactly how we want it, and from there I'll get a straight piece of MDF. I've got one with a factory edge on. I can super glue and masking tape it to the neck in exactly the right position and just kind of trim in that straight edge along there and the other side. I've cleaned up the heel end on the disc sander, and then once I've got these sides where I need them to be, I will then kind of just put a little bit of tidying up radius on those corners. But apart from that, I think we're doing okay on this one. So that's the neck all cut out now, and it has gone well. I'm pleased with the shape of the headstock, and it's always a nice feeling to route these in without doing any damage. However, there is something I do want to address whilst I've got the chance at the moment. And I mentioned earlier that some of these carbon rods were just ever so slightly proud in places. Now the glue's gone off really nicely now, so there's no stickiness or anything. So we can address this, and I'm simply just going to use a card scraper. I don't like sanding carbon because the dust is quite nasty, so I think kind of doing it with a card scraper is a better idea because you're getting shavings instead of dust, so less likely to be kind of airborne. And I'm just going to feel where it's proud and just give it a quick scrape. And that's much better. They are totally flush and level now. Now there are 2 or 3 little jobs that I want to get sorted out on this before we go too much further. We need to thin the headstock down a little bit. That's currently kind of 18, 19 mil. It probably needs to be nearer 14 to accommodate the tuners. We need to drill through for the tuners, and I always do that before I trim that bit off, because that means anything that blows out the front of here is going to get trimmed off anyway. So that just helps keep things nice and clean and neat. And we need to kind of establish the hole in the heel end for the access to the truss rod, and I might have to do something with that because this is paper thin at the moment, so I'm not sure if we're going to be able to kind of drill a nice clean hole into there. We shall have to see. What I might do is put a plug of cabbage bark in there, like a little circular plug that we can drill through for the access, and that will kind of look nice in the end of there, even though, to be honest, you won't really be seeing a huge amount of it. Some of this I can do, but the main part of thinning the headstock down, I don't really want to do it yet until I've got somewhere along with this fretboard and I know exactly where it's going to sit, so I can cut that curved section of the transition between the two in properly. And obviously we're nowhere near with this fretboard yet. So I'm going to put the neck to one side with the body for a little while I progress with the work on the fretboard by getting the fret slots cut, getting the radius put on, getting it cut to shape and everything. But all of that will be for the next episode. I'll leave this one here. So as always, if you've enjoyed this, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you very soon. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.